especially if this is something new to you, which it might be. All right. So if you have not been to one of our seminars yet, you're in for a real treat. And if you are not yet part of our Autism Special Interest Group, we just want to give you a plug and encourage you to attend more of our events and to jump into different ways to get involved. So our Autism SIG through ABCT is focused on a number of priorities. The first is conducting work that is aligned with the priorities of the autistic community. The second is promoting meaningful and relevant clinical care. The third is collaborating with and learning from autistic advocates and other community members. And the fourth is using respectful and affirming language when referencing autism and developmental differences. Um, you can join us and follow us and do all sorts of things. If you haven't already, this QR code will take you to our website where you're able to easily join our SIG and get on our listserv. There's also the website you can see on the slide here. And I want to give a plug for some upcoming events. As we kick off 2026, we normally have a number of seminars. The one today is our first seminar, but we will be having a second seminar in April, and you can kind of keep your eyes peeled for the promotional materials for that. It's going to be focused on the intersection between autism and current immigration issues. In November of 2026, we will hold our annual pre-conference event, and ABCT will be in Baltimore this year. If you haven't seen it already, ABCT submission portal is open, and so we would encourage you to submit your conference abstracts to that. Our SIG runs entirely off of donor support. And so this QR code will take you to a page where if you haven't joined, you're able to join. And as you join the SIG, you'll also be asked to make a donation as an optional way to give back to the SIG. And we use those donations for all sorts of really cool things. We give out trainee travel awards, autistic member travel awards. We use it to host amazing speakers like Dr. McDonald, and we use it to fund different kind of pre-conference events. So thank you so much for considering doing that. All right, without further ado, I am thrilled to get to introduce T.A. McDonald today, who is going to be our speaker for our first seminar of the year. Dr. McDonald is going to be presenting on the connection between neurodivergent physical and mental health, crucial considerations for therapeutic practice. And Dr. McDonald, when she sent me her bio, she was like, you could, if you want to, you're able to abridge it. And so much of it is really relevant to the work that we do in our SIG. And so I think I'm going to read all of it. So Dr. T.A. McDonald is a multiply neurodivergent therapist and published researcher who is passionate about neurodiversity affirming research and practice. Her work focuses primarily on autistic flourishing in the areas of autistic identity, self-determination, autistic strengths, and in developing neurodiversity affirming approaches for treating co-occurring chronic health conditions such as sleep and eating disorders. She graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison with her unique interdisciplinary PhD focused solely on autism and a master's degree in developmental psychology. During this time, she developed and validated the Autism Spectrum Identity Scale. Dr. McDonald completed graduate level training in the Leadership for Education in Neurodevelopmental Disabilities, or LEN program, at the Weizmann Center. As a postdoctoral fellow at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, she designed and implemented Spectrum Pathways, a multi-component neurodiversity affirming self-determination program. During her time as research faculty at the Vanderbilt University Medical Center, Dr. McDonald continued her research focused on autistic flourishing through increasing the understanding of autistic abilities and challenges, autistic identity and negotiation of stigma, and autistic learning styles and motivation. Dr. McDonald has also adapted physical health-related interventions, such as cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, to better match autistic social communication and learning styles. In 2020, Dr. McDonald published her unifying theory of autism, the broader autism phenotype constellations disability matrix paradigm, which describes how 6 autistic strengths can interplay with co-occurring conditions to create the challenges and diagnostic criteria experienced by autists. In order to directly serve neurodivergent people in the community, Dr. McDonald earned a master's degree in counseling psychology. She is the founder of Spectrum for Life, a neurodiversity affirming research organization, a consultant for mental health services for the state of Tennessee's Department of Disability and Aging, and she sees clients through her private practice, Spectrum for Life Counseling. And we are just thrilled to have her today. This is a topic that has been of great interest to our SIG, and I can't think of a better person to be giving the webinar. And so I'm going to stop sharing and kick it off to you, TA. And I think you're going to say this too, but throughout the webinar today, we ask that you use the Q&A function to submit questions. And Dr. McDonald has some dedicated times during the presentation in which your Rady will be fielding her some of those questions.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you. It is an honor to be here to talk with you. And this is a topic that's very important to me, this connection between neurodivergent physical and mental health. If you've been to one of my talks before, you know I pack a lot into them, and this topic is no exception. So we're going to get started. I have specific places where I'm going to pause for questions as we go along. But I want you to feel free to be asking those questions, at any time in the chat. So don't wait until those slides come up. As you have questions come up, go ahead and put them in. Comment on, what you're learning, even if you don't have questions. Just whatever you're learning as you're going along. I have found that highly educated, intelligent people know some of this, but few realize all of this information. So your comments help me improve the presentation for future audiences, but it also helps normalize learning this information for everyone. All right. Let's get started. I'm going to be covering 5 major topics in this talk. First, I'll orient you to the health situation in the general population. Then I'll provide an overview of the connection between mental and physical health. Then I'll delve into the specific health conditions for neurodivergent people. I'll discuss a unifying model of autism, the broader autism phenotype constellations disability matrix paradigm, oh, that name, or the BAPCO DMAP, and introduce parts of it as a general model for neurodivergence. Finally, because this is a talk for practitioners, I'll discuss mental health approaches to physical health conditions when you're working with neurodivergent clients. Okay, let's get started with talking about health in the general population. The majority of adults in the US are not healthy. 60% have a chronic health condition, and 40% have 2 or more conditions. 42% are affected by obesity, and the range of other chronic health conditions affects every system in the body. These health conditions interact with the fact that over half of the population engages in low activity, but low activity is really just part of the issue. Americans struggle with major and direct risk factors such as poor nutrition, physical inactivity, smoking, and alcohol, but they are affected by a huge range of social determinants such as where you work and live, what kind of employment and housing you have, the affordability and access to nutrition, safe activity, social support, access or not access, but exposure to environmental hazards, and the list just goes on. I can't cover everything. I'm going to focus on a topic that's daunting for everyone, and a lot of people don't realize it, getting enough nutrition. We think of poor nutrition as making poor life choices, but the problem is actually much bigger than that. The US has had a significant decline in nutritional density of fruits and vegetables in the last 50 to 70 years. And there's a lot of reasons for this. First, the soils in the US are depleted from nutrient mining. This is where farming depletes the nutrients from the soil faster than the nutrients can be replaced. This is caused in part by intensive industrial farming. The reduced nutrient density is also caused by climate change, agrochemicals, and monoculture, and that's where modern farming lacks sufficient biodiversity to really replenish the crops. Farmers are also planting high yield crops, which are often less nutrient dense. And then on top of it, the consumer has had a role in this. Fruits and vegetables have become sweeter. And the sugar content displaces the nutrient content that's in the food. In the 1970s, broccoli was so bitter that children didn't like it. Now, broccoli's very sweet, not bitter at all. Everything is sweeter. And this lack of nutrients in our fruits and vegetables and the inability to avoid higher sugar content in foods results in Americans are being overfed but undernourished. And the problem is you can't just eat a balanced diet. You won't get the nutrition that you need. And you won't hear about this from most doctors because they don't know. This is reported in the scientific literature, in the government literature, but nutrition is barely covered, if at all, by most medical provider education. Nutrition matters for mental health too. And I'm going to be talking about that extensively. And I want you to be thinking about how much did your education cover this, in terms of physical health and mental health. Americans have serious nutrient deficiencies. The CDC's National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey collects data about the health of adults and children in the United States, and they found 100% of the population is deficient in potassium, which should be plentiful and easy to obtain. 93% are deficient in vitamin D, 92% in choline, 89% in vitamin E, 82% in magnesium, 67% in vitamin K, 44% in calcium, 43% in vitamin A, and 39% are deficient in vitamin C. And these are deficiencies. This does not even include the subclinical low levels of nutrients that are experienced across the United States. All of these deficiencies are related to mental health. 3 of them, potassium, magnesium, and calcium, play an outsized role in neurological processes. You need them for your neurons to fire. On the other hand, 70, I say 70, that's my dyslexia, I do this a lot. 97% of Americans have excess sodium intake. Your body cells require vitamins to form basic structures and to perform basic functions. When we are this deficient, we cannot function properly. So these deficiencies in potassium, calcium, and magnesium are serious business. Most of you have taken biology courses and psychobiology courses, and I want to know how much nutrition was covered in those courses. But some of you may remember learning about the role that these 4 minerals play with neuronal activity. This is a very brief refresher. The balance between sodium and potassium is extremely important for biological functioning and mental health. Sodium depolarizes a neuron, which causes it to activate or fire. Potassium repolarizes the neuron, which returns and maintains the resting state of the neuron. Potassium also regulates the firing frequency of the neuron. Similarly, the balance between calcium and magnesium is extremely important, as calcium triggers the release of neurotransmitters. Calcium also plays a role in synaptic plasticity and learning and memory. Magnesium regulates the calcium and creates stability in the neuron. And with neurotransmitter activity, it prevents overexcitation of the of the neuron and prevents neurotoxicity from too many neurotransmitters being released. And in a minute, I'm going to talk about how the body is managing that overabundance of sodium that I discussed. But right now, I want to emphasize that the presence of deficiencies in potassium, calcium, and magnesium is bad news. Insufficient minerals means the body must choose which neurons to fire. It will prioritize bodily function over mental and emotional functioning. Imbalances cause neuronal functioning to become destabilized. The body works hard to prevent the overabundance of salt from overactivating the neurons, which becomes an impossible task when it's coupled with potassium deficiency. Similarly, an excess of calcium and deficiency of magnesium can lead to overexcitation of the neuron and excessive release of neurotransmitters. And then the opposite, if not enough calcium is supplied, then the neurons do not properly release neurotransmitters. So simply put, chronic potassium, calcium, and magnesium deficiencies are serious. Americans are struggling with inflammation. You see this in the news. This may be things that your clients are talking about. It's not surprising given the abundance of salt and sugar we have in our diet. Both salt and sugar have antibacterial behavior. A lot of people don't know why. Why is it? What's really happening? But our mitochondria DNA are descended from bacteria, and their structures make them vulnerable to contact with salt or sugar. They break apart. This matters to our bodies because the mitochondria are the power stores of the cells. Damaged cells lead to dysfunction, and if not repaired in time, become damaged copies. And that leads to ongoing aging and disease and dysfunction. The body protects the cells and the mitochondria by flooding the interstitial fluid between the cells to dilute the salt and the sugar. And although this is intended to protect, chronic inflammation itself contributes to tissue damage and widespread system of dysfunction. And so, as you know, salt is a powerful preservative that can harm cells, but it's also really needed for this neurological functioning. So the body needs that salt, but it needs it to stay in balance. And as you know, we're getting that overabundance of salt. Our kidneys are the front line for defense, and they work in part by decreasing aldosterone, which causes the body to excrete excess salt. But water is needed to do this. And the body is constantly guarding against dehydration. So it actively retains water to protect the cells, so inflammation, bloating, and high blood pressure occur. But water retention is a massive energy expenditure for the body. And to manage it, it directs energy away from the cardiovascular system, which then strains that system. And then paradoxically, it's causing inflammation, but then the body treats salt as a stressor and increases glucosteroids and cortisol, which act as an anti-inflammatory. So over time, with chronic overabundance of salt, the body stops responding with glucosteroids, and this is called glucocorticoid resistance. To get salt away from the neurons and away from the cells, it will then start storing the salt in the skin and muscles, and it degrades both and triggers immune responses. And it's a huge range of immune responses, but like eczema is one of them. Chronic excess leads to high blood pressure, edema, kidney strain. And yes, the body will use drinking water to manage salt, but interestingly, excess salt intake does not always make you thirsty. Instead, it tends to increase your hunger. And I propose that if we're also mineral deficient, it's possible this hunger is in part driven through mineral-seeking behavior. Potassium in food can balance out the salt, but only assuming that the food is high in potassium and low in salt. And we can release salt through the sweat. The big take-home message here is that an overabundance of salt is a major driver of physical health issues and mental dysfunction that together affect mental health. So I talked about how excess sugar can affect the mitochondria and how the body responds with inflammation. I'd like to discuss a few other bodily responses. More than half of Americans consume excess added sugar. And that doesn't account for the fact that our fruits and vegetables have become sweeter, and it doesn't account for the increase in processed carbohydrates in our diet. And excess sugar is a big deal. Most of you are aware that sugar activates insulin in the body, but might not know the why that's leading to disease. I didn't know for a very long time. So as you know, excess sugar, especially in the form of glucose, damages cells throughout the body. So insulin acts quickly to get immediately available energy to the cells so that the cells can use it. And then it takes the excess and stores it as fat or glycogen, typically in adipose cells. But over time, overstorage becomes a problem for the cells. It causes those cells to rupture or die. And when this happens, it triggers inflammation throughout the body. Overstorage also triggers ectopic storage in your organs, and that's fat, which is then stored in the liver, muscles, heart, and other organs. And that storage damages those organs. And so, as you know, chronic inflammation is there to protect the cells from damage, but it's also diluting other signals. And so it changes the behavior of insulin receptor sites. It's interfering with insulin signaling. So what's happening is not enough insulin is being provided to the insulin receptor sites, which is one aspect of insulin resistance. The pancreas figures out that there's still too much glucose present, and it overcompensates by overproducing insulin beyond its sustainable capability, which leads to exhaustion in the pancreas. Then the body can no longer regulate blood sugar. Physical inactivity decreases insulin sensitivity in the muscle, and that's because the muscles want to use, not store glucose. So the excess sugar in the body does not just affect mitochondria, it affects almost all the cells in the body by breaking down collagen. And I'm going to be talking a lot about collagen later. Over time, this excess sugar causes nerve damage, dysfunction, and pain. And so the micronutrients of vitamins, minerals, they're a big part of the story, but we need more than that. Macronutrients, such as polyunsaturated fats, are important for physical and mental health. High levels of monounsaturated fat and low levels of polyunsaturated fat increase depression. We all know that we need carbohydrates for energy, carbohydrates with low glycemic loads, think whole grains and brown rice, they're great for energy. But our bodies are often filled with high glycemic load. So bread, pasta, white rice, and those are also linked to greater depression. Dehydration is linked to anger, confusion, depression, and fatigue. Fiber, but not all fiber. Vegetable fiber is associated with a lower risk of depression, but dry and fruit fibers are not. Our microbiome remains cutting edge in our sciences, and which it shows that if you have a healthy and diverse microbiome, that this plays a major role in increasing physical and mental health. But to have a healthy and diverse microbiome, it's advised that you get over 30 different plants a week, which is not common in the typical American diet. So poor physical health is a primary barrier to mental health. If your clients' brains do not have enough vitamins and minerals, those brains cannot function properly, and their dysfunction will increase with stress. But most importantly, the lack of vitamins and minerals cause distress in the body and mind. And all the behavioral and cognitive approaches in the world, without a focus on physical health, will not adequately compensate for this dysfunction. And that makes poor physical health a primary barrier for mental health. Okay, so we are at our first discussion stopping place, and I'm curious what your reactions are to this information. In what ways are you seeing poor physical health maybe affecting your clients?
Thanks so much, TA. And Uradi, I appreciate you dropping in the chat too. You raised a really thought-provoking question at the start of the seminar on how much nutrition was covered in your education courses. And I think for everyone here, I'm really interested to hear how you're reacting to some of this information.
Yeah, I know that when I was going through psychology, when I had psychobiology, they talked about macronutrients. They were talking about, fats, lipids, carbohydrates, proteins, and then they talked about minerals. They talked about those sodium, potassium channels, and so forth. And I had gone to ask my professor, what about vitamins and minerals? Where do I find out about this in my education? And he said, oh, well, I guess you'd have to go to the nutrition department for that. And that's a fact. And so it's interesting too, for doctors, it's really becoming a matter of their self-education, because it's not really part of their general education. And they have a very similar lack of education on this.
Yeah. Now we had a question. You can put your questions in the Q&A. We can see those come through. So that would be the best spot to put them in.
And I'm expecting more questions as we go through. I'm going to go ahead and continue on. Like I said, I've got 5 stopping spaces throughout this presentation. So keep adding your thoughts, your comments. If this is like old hat information, go, I already know this. You will not offend me. But I am very interested in your reactions. All right. So we've completed the first section, and now I'm going to discuss that mental and physical health connection, again, in the general population. And I'm going to do that with the general population, and later I'm going to really bring this closer to neurodivergent populations. And a big part of this is going to be about the stress responses. So just to further emphasize, nutrient deficiencies cause mental distress. Mental distress also causes nutrient deficiencies. Inflammation increases mental distress, and mental distress increases inflammation. And then nutrient deficiencies increase inflammation, and inflammation increases nutrient deficiency. So this is all super, super, super connected. And people with chronic health conditions, which is the majority of the population, are 2 to 3 times more likely to experience mental illness. And we are stressed out as a nation. The American Psychological Association puts out its Stress in America report every year, and the picture gets worse every year. The nation is experiencing high levels of stress, with more than half of the country worrying about the future of the nation, the economy, the spread of misinformation, work-related stress. You might be feeling stress hearing this list. Money, politics, housing, mass shootings, social division, AI, global tension, family responsibilities, the environment, the impact of law enforcement on communities, violence and crime, race relationships, race relations and relationships. I mean, it's a huge range of stressors that, individually and collectively take a toll on mental health. And this stress matters. 76% of Americans report physical symptoms of distress. 69% report needing more emotional support. 57% report healthcare access, or it's just healthcare is a major concern, and that includes access and affordability and other things. Half, or nearly half, of Americans report, as a result of stress, losing patience or yelling at family members, skipping physical activity, difficulty making decisions, poor physical health, and not adequately caring for themselves. Over half of the country describes themselves as lonely, such as having lack of companionships or feeling left out or isolated from others. And those who experienced high and moderate loneliness also reported higher rates of difficulty planning for the future, difficulty making decisions, difficulty caring for themselves, and difficulty attending to responsibilities. And 94% of them reported physical stress symptoms. For those who reported social division as a high concern, 94% of them also reported physical health symptoms or physical stress symptoms. So I want to talk a little bit about stress on the physical and emotional health of people. We live stressful lives. And when we experience things like worry, fear, anger, defeat, social isolation, and other emotions that can signal threat, our sympathetic nervous system creates immediate stress reactions. That's our flight, fight, or even in freeze response. This is an instant release of several neurotransmitters that increase our heart rate, blood pressure, breathing rate, blood glucose levels, and more. And they prepare the body for immediate energy expenditure and alertness. We have another set of symptoms that also kicks in. And this is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal thyroid axis, the HPAT. And it releases stress hormones, cortisol and thyroid stimulating hormone. Now, the thyroid gland manages your metabolism and helps you maintain homeostasis. That's its major role. But when you are in stress, homeostasis must be disrupted. And so the thyroid function becomes destabilized. We also mobilize fats for energy and release endorphins to suppress pain. And so while the sympathetic nervous system kicks in immediately and relatively temporarily, the HPAT can stay kicked in to manage chronic stress. That muscle tension that always stays tight, constantly being on guard when you enter certain circumstances like work or family, constant worry over finances or reputation, that sort of thing. That's maintaining this chronic system. Both responses affect all of our bodily systems: immune, neurological, cardiovascular, musculoskeletal, gastrointestinal, the whole shebang. And both increase disease risk across these symptoms. And that includes risk for anxiety, depression, and suicide. And so that really shows this stress that we're experiencing is having major impacts on our physical health, just as our physical health has major impacts on our on our stress. So you got the idea. Body distress creates mental distress and vice versa. This distress occurs particularly when the mind and body do not have enough resources for the stress. If the body doesn't have enough health and health related resources, if the mind does not have enough experiences, skills, and environmental resources, human beings need energy for stress management. If we don't have enough energy, then our stress responses generate anger or anxiety. And this is fake energy. It's energy we don't really have. And it's not just a credit card. We're not just borrowing. It's theft because some of the damage cannot be repaired. All right. So I'm going to bring this a bit closer to practice. You're probably all aware of, these cycles of unhealthy behavior. And if I account for poor health, it informs this cycle in the following way. A person with unhealthy coping skills experiences a trigger. At that point, if they're unhealthy, they don't have enough health to think and they make a snap judgment. The intense emotional and physical feelings generate fake energy, but they still don't have enough health for their neurons for thinking under stress. They can't downregulate fast enough before engaging in a regrettable action. And for some people, in some situations, these actions serve to cover the distress, such as in the case of substance abuse or in avoidance behaviors. In other cases, the function is to stop the stimuli, such as in the case of anger. But these are, of course, not real solutions. And I am aware that some of you might be thinking that people act this way because they've learned responses that they need to unlearn. And that is also true. But even people with typically healthy response patterns resort to unhealthy coping when the demands exceed their resources. And as a simple example, think about the difference between when when somebody becomes, hangry or tired. It can be like they're a different person and they can act in all of the ways described by this cycle. All right. Similar issues also occur with cycles of pain. Here, pain activates emotions such as anger, fear, anxiety, and panic, and this generates fake energy. But these negative emotions can also result in reduced social interaction and greater social isolation, partly out of a lack of energy to interact, which is combined with, it generates depressed mood, it combines with depressed mood, and it's accompanied by this loss of energy, which in turn increases the perception of pain. Another pain response is to avoid the activity and avoid any activity. And this is due to pain, but also to insufficient energy, which leads to physical deconditioning, which decreases available energy. And the pain increases with decreased activity and disrupts sleep, which further decreases energy and makes the person even more sensitive to pain. And the person becomes more and more physically and mentally unwell as they go through these cycles. All right. So one approach, and this is something we're all probably familiar with, to the cycles of maladaptive behavior, is that there's this lack of healthy coping mechanisms, and that the addition of the healthy coping mechanisms will shift the person out of the unhealthy stress responses, into a calmer, wiser mind and body, maybe even a healthier body. And this can be implemented in short term and also with chronic stressors. And you're familiar with most of these: deep breathing, social connection, crying, physical activity, creativity, laughter, and physical connection. And they're all great, but they won't fix poor health. And for some people with poor health, some of these activities can create a further crisis if it creates deepening drains on their physical health systems and energy. And so, these are your clients. You might feel like they're apathetic. They don't even want to try, or they try and nothing works for them. So we need new models to think about mental health with neurodivergent people, because they are even more likely to have chronic health conditions than the general population, which I'm going to talk about. So that's the average American. And neurodivergent clients are not immune to those national averages in physical health or stress. Those averages do not account for intersections, and we know that physical health issues increase with low or socioeconomic status, um, which also disproportionately affects other minorities. Stress also disproportionately affects minorities. So given that all of these affect our neurodivergent clients, questions that I have is, in what ways might these issues affect neurodivergent clients differently, right? So they're having the same health conditions, but their reactions might be quite different. Could they be more impacted by a lack of nutrition or by stress, such as housing issues? And then also, how might neurodivergent clients react differently or need different supports when affected by these issues? So, people with these chronic health conditions, they can experience this intense existential crisis affecting all areas of their life due to the connection between their physical and psychological well-being. So we're at our next stopping place. How are we doing with questions? Is anyone, this is kind of a new thing, seeing how
Well,
people are responding.
the Q&A box is open, and so just as a reminder, on the bottom of your screen, you're going to see an icon with a question mark in it. When you click that, you should be able to submit questions. While those are coming in, I've been reflecting as you're talking, TA, and that first question you asked was, how much are we trained in physical health and just how it intersects and relates to mental health. And, I did not receive hardly any training in that. Have obviously, when I've been on interdisciplinary teams, been exposed to it, but not in any formal way. And so I'm wondering, yeah, to kind of hear your reflections on that and what that means for us, and whether and how we do better in that area, when it just
Yeah.
comes to clinical practice. Yeah.
Right. And one of the things I'm going to talk about a little further in this is this sort of tension, this idea of like, well, I do mental health, you know, to how much should I be worrying about this physical health? This is out of my scope of practice, right? That's a big piece that people are going to be, thinking about. But if you think about the constellation of stressors that a person has in their life, really, we could almost think that almost everything that they come to us with, that's the topic of why they're unhappy or why they're not coping well, is outside of the scope of our practice, right? Their
Hmm.
finances, or we're not here to give financial advice.
Right.
um,
Right.
but we are here to suggest that they might benefit from looking for financial advice,
Right.
from shifting their priorities. We are here for that. And I'm going to talk more about how I believe that mental health providers are the cutting edge complement to physical health providers. They are great at diagnosing disease. They're great at doing that, but they're not. Our medical systems are not really great at motivating people for behavior change,
Yeah, totally.
and that's our job. But we can't direct them or give them insight if we don't know about this information.
Right.
We can't help them prioritize. And one of the worst things is seeing somebody really struggling and it never occurring to a mental health provider that this may be a physical health issue.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Maybe physical mental health providers need to be saying, as a part of our practice, when's the last time you've gone to a doctor? Have you had a physical? Did they look at nutrient deficiencies? What's your diet look like? And I mean, I've had clients say my diet is mostly greasy,
Right.
and I can provide information about the general population. I can provide this general information to clients and say, hey, I'm concerned. What would you think about talking to your doctor about your diet?
Yeah, absolutely.
you know and so these are, if we're not thinking about it, it will not be part of our conversations. And yet, if we're not thinking about it, a huge number of our clients that we're seeing, challenges with improvement,
Right.
it could be really due to our techniques will not work with them until they address this. And once they have sufficient nutrition, then suddenly oh my gosh, these techniques become so much easier to implement. And now they're getting successes that they weren't getting before simply because they have more energy and more resources to do it.
Right. Well, I appreciate that. And the reflection too on, it doesn't have to feel necessarily within our scope of practice to ask, right? And to be intentional about, just making those connections and asking the questions.
TA, and
Absolutely.
on that line, as you're talking about nutrition and physical health and thinking about my education, the little bit that it came up that I can remember, it was during psychopharmacology. So I wonder what your thoughts are, is that in the context of exactly what you were saying about medicalization, right? Of these deficiencies and these physical issues versus behavioral change and everything else you just mentioned.
Absolutely. A little bit later in this talk, I'll mention that that for some of the neurodivergent conditions, there's been no research at all about physical health conditions, except in the specific topic of medication reactions. And so, a big part of neurodivergence and mental health, we're looking, and a question is to what degree is our magic bullet through a pill covering up the fact that we have poor health? And and people are looking for that because taking care of physical health, self-care is hard. And people want a quick fix. They want a prescription. And that's fine. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but attending to one without simultaneously attending to other can mean that a question I have is how many people might be on medications while they still have these systems that are not working. It's covering those symptoms. They're not getting help that they need, and then they're actually getting worse health conditions and functioning. And now we've got medications don't work because the systems that they rely on are exhausted.
I,
So
I appreciate that reflection.
You have one question in the QA if you'd like to take it, TA.
yeah, I'm ready for it.
Okay. It says, when I send patients to their physicians to discuss potential deficiencies that may be contributing to their mental health issues, I often hear from patients that their physician downplayed the connection and in some instances will not do testing because they don't see the utility in getting the information.
That's
How
great.
would
I'm
you
going to
su
mention this later in
how would
this
you
thing.
suggest addressing this?
This is something that happens. So doctors don't have the knowledge of this. I'm going to be talking about zebra conditions, but one of the things that they learn is like you just need to eat a balanced diet, which first of all, no one does. But so one of the things that I will sometimes ask my clients to ask their doctors is a very specific question, and the wording matters. And the question is, will it cause me any harm if I take a multivitamin? And expect the answer to be you don't need it. But the answer you're looking for is, will it cause me harm? I have these medical conditions. Will it cause me harm? And if the doctor says no, take a multivitamin, take a multimineral, right? If you ask the doctor, do I need a multivitamin? They will usually say no, that you're getting what you need. And even if they do a panel on your vitamins, it's a snapshot. So your diet might be sufficient for a certain period of time. And this is true for many of the nutrients. It's a snapshot of what's present at this time. Some things like iron will show like you've been deficient for a while. Vitamin D will show you've been deficient for a while. But there's a number of nutrients that the only way they can really assess what your intake is if they were looking at your diet over a period of time. So, and that's part of why some of them might be sort of reluctant to even do a panel because it's not really telling us a lot. So I hope that helps with your questions. I'm going to move forward. Keep putting those questions in. We've got some more sections. Even if you have questions about a previous section, no worries. I'll keep answering them. So don't worry about that at all. I really love hearing from you.
Yeah, we have some momentum. So at our next break, we're gonna hit you with a bunch.
Perfect. Okay, so now I want to focus more specifically on co-occurring conditions in neurodivergent populations. So first of all, the research on physical health in neurodivergent populations is cutting edge and remains sparse due to discrimination. For a long time, research has focused on the cause, cure, prevention of these conditions, and that still remains the focus of many of those. One aspect of the discrimination is structural, and Audrey Scudder and I highlighted ways that the NIH policies, both explicit and shadow policies, block review of grant proposals on physical health and neurodivergent conditions. Although the NIH made some changes after this paper was originally published to no longer exclude people with disabilities, including neurodivergent people, from health disparities research, this may have been reverted with the new executive administration. In fact, the executive administration is actively censoring research on autism. For example, censorship remains at the Autism Interventions Research for Physical Health. And as you can see here on the AIRP website, it states, due to recent presidential executive orders, certain content has been removed under the direction of our federal partners. If there's a particular activity that you're seeking, please email AIRP. I gave a talk with AIRP in April of 2023 on discriminatory funding patterns and policies in the NIH. And this is one of the censored talks. If you click on the link, it will bring you here where you can see that the video is private and not available. There are multiple censored talks on that website. These talks include words like minority or race or equity, in my case, discrimination, and any reference to diversity in gender or sexual orientation. All right, but from that talk, from that paper, and for the purpose of this talk, excuse me, the big take home about the funding patterns is while there was a total of 3 grants that used electronic health records to estimate the prevalence of health conditions in autism, all of those grants were bundled to investigate physical health, which is not a funded topic, with mental health, which was a funded topic. That's how those 3 grants sort of slipped in. There were 0 grants focused on treatment, services, or programs to improve any of the 30 physical health disparity conditions, which were already documented. And over 40 years of autism research, a total of 3 grants were funded recently to look at physical health conditions and none in 40 years to treat them. And I'm talking about well-known disorders such as sleep disorders, gastrointestinal disorders, nutrition, motor disorders, and these are disorders we've known about since the 1990s. I attended talks at Emory on these conditions and autism back in the 90s, but the NIH never funded a grant to treat them in all those years. So I just want that to sink in for just a minute. Okay, so you know that physical health is bad for the general population. The rates for all of those conditions that I talked about are higher for autistic people compared to the general population. So fortunately, Kaiser Permanente, sorry, it's one of those words, supported Crone and her colleagues to investigate physical health disparities in autistic adults using the electronic health records. And these are the 30 physical health disparity conditions for autism that they looked at and they found for autism. And they run the gamut and affect all physical systems, your respiratory, vision, cardiovascular, gastrointestinal, hearing, sleep, musculoskeletal, endocrine, immune systems, and just a huge range. And I've reported in other talks that by the age of 8, the CDC reports that 85% of autistic people have one or more co-occurring conditions. So that's by age 8. So the reality is, if you're working with an autistic client, they likely have a known or unknown physical health condition. And of course, this likelihood increases with age, that they will have multiple known and unknown conditions. There's a similar range of disparities in chronic health conditions for ADHD. So take note of all the different body systems that are impacted, just across the range again. And in Down syndrome, which has its very own specific health profile. And people with Down syndrome also have their own specific grant. So in 2018, Congress passed a new directive called the Include Project that called for a trans NIH research initiative on critical health and quality of life needs for people with Down syndrome. This grant also works to reverse the exclusion of people with Down syndrome from physical health clinical trials. And further, it calls for incentivizing bolstered recruitment of participants with Down syndrome. To my knowledge, it is the only neurodivergent condition with this level of physical health focus. So what about other neurodivergent conditions? Well, we don't know. There's almost no literature. There's one article that indicates that people with Tourette's are at higher risk for hypertension, autoimmune disorders, type 2 diabetes, obesity, chronic respiratory disease, allergies, and sleep disorders. But in general, there's essentially no research on physical health across other neurodivergent populations. And as I mentioned before, the exception is research on medical side effects. So focusing, on like the effects, the adverse effects that can happen to cardiovascular and neurological and metabolic, systems. In general, we don't know the health status of other neurodivergent conditions. But there is new research showing that some neurodivergent conditions may be linked to constellations of physical health conditions. All Brains Belong, Vermont, was founded by Mel Hauser, and she's an autistic doctor in Vermont. And this whole project was funded by AIRP and the Organization for Autism Research. They discovered that autistic and ADHD patients presented with a constellation of related medical conditions, and that common medical conditions for these medical treatments for these conditions make the conditions worse in neurodivergent patients. They have multiple resources, but this one is particularly important. And I would advise you to have a copy of this on hand. Go to their site, grab it, have a copy on hand. Ask your clients to bring it with them to their doctor and to help guide questions that they may have. It is particularly nice. They point out that multiple conditions, hypermobility and Ehlers-Danlos syndromes, postural orthostatic tachycardia, dysautonomia, which is this general feeling of your body systems not regulating properly, intolerance to cold and heat, difficulty with sitting, standing, all kinds of autonomic systems that don't feel like they're working right, irritable bowel syndrome, chronic pain, fibromyalgia, mast cell dysfunction, vitamin deficiencies, and other symptoms are more common in autism and ADHD. And there's essentially no information for other neurodivergent conditions, but I wouldn't be surprised. Of these, I'm going to talk quite a bit about hypermobility and Ehlers-Danlos, which is related to every one of these other conditions listed, on the sheet. And I believe that every professional working with neurodivergent populations needs to be aware of Ehlers-Danlos and hypermobility. So before I get started, we've learned a lot about hypermobility and Ehlers-Danlos in recent years, but there's so much to learn. But as one postdoctoral scholar bemoans, the NIH does not provide much money. Their phrase is barely a penny towards this condition. One of the best resources for this condition is freely available, and I'll have everybody I'll have this website provided to you. It was a body of work that's commissioned by the Social Security Administration, and it provides the bulk of information that I'm going to be covering today. And it's a huge document. It's like a 300-page document. It's like a book, but it covers these disorders in detail. So let's talk a bit about what we do know. Again, I'm focusing on hypermobility and Ehlers-Danlos, and particularly the hypermobility type of Ehlers-Danlos. This is a genetic condition affecting collagen. It is not low collagen, it's strange collagen that has low tone. It stretches easily and it doesn't activate tone. And by that I mean, think of it as not squeezing or flexing like typical collagen. And actually, I'm going to call it collagen, but I'm really talking about all of the connective tissue in the body, which includes collagen, reticular fibers, and elastin. These are all affected by hypermobility spectrum disorders and Ehlers-Danlos. Collagen is very important. It's present in every cell in the human body except red blood cells. It's in your skin, muscles, bones, tendons, ligaments, cartilage, blood vessels, organs. It's the whole shebang. And it plays a strong role in the structure, function, and protection of neurons in the brain and body. So it's not just a joint condition. And so we've learned a lot about cortisol in the body, but importantly, cortisol breaks down connective tissue. And collagen is impacted by other bodily processes, such as the presence or absence of hormones. So women with hypermobility experience changes in their hypermobility symptoms across their cycles. Symptoms can appear, change, and worsen with puberty, pregnancy, postpartum, and menopause. 30% of men with Ehlers-Danlos have low testosterone, which also affects their symptoms. So some of you might be hearing about fascia lately. I don't know, my feed's full of it, but it might be tailored to me. But fascia is extremely important in hypermobility and Ehlers-Danlos. It runs through everything in the whole body. It is the glue of the human body. It's a web of connective tissues that supports every structure, not just outside of it, but it runs all through it. Fascia changes structure from fluid to gel, and these changes represent changes in function. It holds the body together and in place. It's important for movement, sensation, and perception. And it's involved with the regulation of all of the body symptoms. I said symptoms, I mean systems. With low tone connective tissue, people with Ehlers-Danlos and hypermobility can feel like they're coming unglued, physically and mentally. Most are undiagnosed, and they don't know why they feel the way they do. And so I keep saying Ehlers-Danlos and hypermobility spectrum disorders, and I want to state very clearly, there's no real differences between hypermobility type Ehlers-Danlos and hypermobility spectrum disorders. They thought that in 2017, they separated the two. They thought that having fewer visible symptoms of hypermobility meant a less severe condition, but it is now consensus that they share the same degree of negative symptoms and outcomes. So they no longer think of them as, and they're talking about in the next version, they're going to combine the two back together. So also our diagnostic processes fall short of accurately diagnosing people with this condition. And it doesn't really matter. Most medical providers aren't even aware of the condition. And when they do, they have inaccurate beliefs, such as thinking it's just a joint condition and it's not a big deal and it's not related to their specialty. Every single provider will say it's outside of their scope. It's not really their focus, everybody. And this article says that if you're someone that knows about it, it's now your responsibility to help inform other providers and even other providers on your client's team, because you're the only one now. So they don't know that it has system-wide effects, and there's essentially no specialist in this condition. So they're not going to find a specialist. So people with the condition, they go undiagnosed well into adulthood, and they get a lot of incomplete diagnoses and incorrect diagnoses with an 11 to 12-year delay from first reporting symptoms to getting a correct diagnosis. Families are not aware that they themselves are having problems, or that their kids or family members are having problems, because they've been dealing with their own symptoms their whole lives and believe the symptoms are normal. They think being in pain all the time is normal. So once they're diagnosed, they often receive inappropriate interventions because typical approaches and treatments make the symptoms of Ehlers-Danlos worse. And if you don't have a specialist that knows that, they will be trying to prescribe surgeries for joints, and the outcomes for surgeries are abysmal in Ehlers-Danlos. And so if they don't know, or they might be giving steroids, or they might be giving pain medications, or they might not be giving enough. It ends up that like anesthesias and pain medications don't last as long on people with these conditions. So they're actually having problems in a range of all kinds of treatment settings. So just to cover a few bases and reemphasize, Ehlers-Danlos and people with both of these conditions appear healthy. but they have a range of seemingly unrelated symptoms. It's known as a zebra condition. So for you, just assume that every symptom they have is related to hypermobility. Headaches, stomach aches, anxiety, doesn't matter. It's all related to the hypermobility. But that doesn't mean that other conditions do not also exist and that they don't, other conditions are going to interact with the hypermobility. There are 13 types. 12 of them can be detected with genetic screening, but the most common type, hypermobility, there is no genetic test. It runs in families. We know it's genetic, but there's no test. 20 to 40% of autistic people have hypermobility. Within people who are diagnosed with hypermobility, 16 to 46% have ADHD. We do not know the percentage of people with ADHD with hypermobility. So there's it's never been looked in the population of ADHD. All of the hypermobility syndromes have joint hypermobility, skin differences, and tissue fragility. And each of the different types of hypermobility conditions also have specific features. Okay, this is very important for mental health providers. Hypermobility is strongly associated with anxiety, depression, neurodivergent traits, and eating disorders. And this may be due to energy expended with pain and all of the other systemic effects. We don't really know. We also know that people with the hypermobility conditions are more likely to have adverse reactions to over-the-counter medications and prescribed medications across the board. The symptoms vary from person to person. They come and go within a day, within a lifespan. There's no cure for it, only management. And this last point is so important. It is important that people with Ehlers-Danlos or hypermobility are not inappropriately diagnosed with a psychiatric or neurodivergent condition as the sole explanation of their symptoms, while Ehlers-Danlos and hypermobility symptoms go undiagnosed and physical impairments go untreated. So that was in that document. That's what the Social Security Administration, that's a direct quote, Social Security Administration Commission document. This is what they're saying. So it is a big deal. It's considered to be a zebra condition. It's the official symbol of the Ehlers-Danlos, and that's because medical students are instructed when you hear hoofbeats behind you, don't expect to see a zebra. And so they're instructed to look for more common and usual explanations and not for surprising or complex diagnoses. But this practice fails people with Ehlers-Danlos and hypermobility because all of those strange symptoms really are connected. And no two zebras have identical stripes. And similarly, the symptoms are hugely varied across Ehlers-Danlos and hypermobility, just like we see in neurodivergence, huge variations in presentation and largely unrecognized by medical professionals. All right, so we're at another stopping place. I heard that there are some questions in here. So what questions do you have?
I have a comment and then two questions from the QA. About EDS, just because you just talked about this. I work with autistic children, right? And I have EDS myself. And the only reason I self-disclose is precisely because of what you said. And I self-disclose to everybody that knows me and now this group. Because if you are one person that knows about EDS, it's your responsibility now. And for my patients, for my clients, most of the times, the first time they're hearing about EDS is through me. And the first time these kids are getting referred for pain, hypermobility, GI issues, assessments is because I am the one identifying it, right? As a psychologist. So that tells you everything you need to know about EDS in neurodiversity. So that's my comment.
Right.
And then sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, right. So you're highlighting the fact that if you didn't talk to your clients about it, they would not find out about it. And so that's why it's so vitally important that we consider, thinking about this within our scope of practice we need to be thinking about it. If we're going to work with people who are neurodivergent, you've got all the chronic health conditions that are in the general population, but here's another condition that's even more specific. And many of them will not meet the score. So one of the things that I didn't cover is there's these different tests, and these tests are not great. Basically, if a person has joints that come out of place, you need to be thinking about Ehlers-Danlos. If they're overly limber, if you see them having difficulty maintaining a normal sitting posture in your office, and they're like they can't quite sit up and maintain the whole time, you might want to start saying, hey, I'm noticing this, and I want to ask, I know you're on the spectrum. There's a condition that sometimes occurs. I'm wondering about this, and you're looking for opportunities to bring it up. So
Right.
yes, well done you, by the way.
It's a community. The zebra community is a very tight community. So we have to do what we do. What you just said makes me think about this patient that I had, this little kid, because I always see kids, right? So it makes you think about self-advocating and those things, right? You shall not necessarily know how to communicate these things. This kiddo is moving, doing an evaluation with me, and just moving around my office. I hear the click, click, click of those joints,
Mm-hmm.
subluxating and whatnot. And parents are reporting that this child is passing out every time they go to PE or throwing up every day at PE. And I'm like, okay, so PE is physical movement, is physical activity. Something's going on there. And I hear all these joints popping. And again, right, to Catherine's point before, we're not medical doctors, right?
Yeah.
But it has to be that way for a kid to get a referral to a specialist that are so few of them in the US and all of that.
And you bring up a good point. So now you have a child that might not be sitting well in schools. So they're not staying in their seat. They're having all these conduct issues. That's due to a condition that's not been diagnosed. They might get a diagnosis of ADHD for being constantly on the go, but some will not be constantly on the go. Some will be wiped out and slumped. And they will have cognitive issues that are coming from it, not because they have specific learning disabilities necessarily, but because they are really struggling with what it takes to survive a school day. Families can even know about the diagnosis, and now they've got to come in and they've got to negotiate how to have their child access the education in a way that's going to meet their physical, mental, and emotional needs. And I don't even know if Ehlers-Danlos, I don't know if that's a 504. I think that's going to be a 504. That's not going to be your average, autism. So you might have a client that is more hypermobile. And they might have ADHD, and they're not really going to be able to access a tailored curriculum in a tailored school environment, but they still have to negotiate, and they're going to have mental health outcomes from that, frustration at a minimum. And so that's going to be part of your scope of practice, how to negotiate, how to manage the stress of that, how to move forward, how to strategize, all of that. Yeah.
Definitely. And in that particular case, that was part of the conversation, right? So something's happening during PE, they need to modify their IEP and things like that. Thank you so much. Back to the
Absolutely.
QA.
I can probably do one more question
Yeah,
and then I'm going to move on.
definitely. So you have one question from the previous topic. This is great information in the context of testing, which provides opportunity for recommendations to address needs identified. What actions could be included to address these type of concerns? Schedule a consultation with a nutritionist, a medical provider regarding diet, etc. How else can this look? Because parents usually want clear steps to make.
Yeah. And so, all of those are great. But sometimes, I mean, when the issues seem to be large enough, it's easy to do that. But the big part is, how do you find out if the issues are large enough to begin with? And so that's really, there are no codified assessments. So everybody's, first of all, we have to have awareness of it. Even if I gave you mine, I'll tell you, I don't really sit down and do an assessment with folks. I Partly because health is a touchy topic. People don't want to be told to improve their health. People don't, they don't, People don't. So really, to be honest, I am waiting for moments where I think that I can bring this up sensitively and I can get buy-in. You know, the topics that I talked about early, you might not have known the specific details. You might not have known how bad it was, but you know that these are issues, and we all know that each one of us is struggling with these issues, and we know that lifestyle change is one of the most difficult things to change in the US. So that buy-in is everything. So you're really waiting for opportunities. Knowing this lets you bring it to your mind, so you're looking for the opportunities. And then when the opportunities come, part of the art is how do I gently bring that up? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that as I get further in. That's going to be in my next couple sections. All right. All right, I'm going to move on now to, I'm going to talk about my unifying model, which is my baby. But I think it really matters as a way of thinking about physical health and about autism. And it's a different way of thinking about autism in general. So you may have heard about the biopsychosocial model of disability. This has been around since the 70s, and it states that, you know, whatever a person's symptoms or circumstance, it's the sum of their biological factors, their psychological factors, and their environmental or social factors. And we often separate topics or symptoms into one or maybe two of these categories, but it is always all three simultaneously. So there's also, just like there's this biopsychosocial model, we also have models of disability. I'm going to cover these very quickly. We have a medical model that, and I cover this all of this deeply in a chapter in autism and the neurobiology of autism spectrum disorders. The medical model assumes that a person's impairment is the cause of their poor quality of life, and if you can just, you know, cure or treat that impairment, then the person will get better. And that's especially true in the case of cancer, right? You treat the cancer. The social model of disability states that if everyone had the same impairment, such as deafness, we as a society would better support the impairment for quality of life, and that therefore society should be less ableist with resources to support people with impairments. The ecological view states that whether something is viewed as an impairment depends on the match between a person's trait and the environment. And the indigenous models are diverse and embrace many models, but several include highly inclusive and egalitarian concepts such as people should focus on helping each other in all the ways that we can. I really like that. Simply put, that all people are equally valuable. So the I developed this theme with this very catchy name, the broader autism phenotype constellations disability matrix paradigm, which makes me like die every time I say it. I call it BAPCO, DMAP for short. It's a biopsychosocial model of autism. It includes the medical, social, and ecological and egalitarian models of disability. I can't cover the whole theory. And this brief talk, you know, it's going to risk some misunderstandings, but ask your questions and also email me about any topic and this topic with any information or any questions you have, because I love dialogue. So I'm going to cover this very quickly. I see how we're doing on time, so I'm going to cover this fairly quickly. The foundation of autistic traits are adaptive, and that's differences in memory and attention, object orientation, systemizing, nonconformity, and sensual and perceptual differences. Any of these traits, an overabundance of any of these traits, disables a person in their development for language and communication. It's covered thoroughly in the paper, and I also cover that in other talks. But no autistic person necessarily has all of the same traits of these six constellations. There are multiple traits within attention and memory and so on. And you don't have to have all six. Instead, there's constellations. So essentially, any human trait that cannot be self-regulated or auto-regulated is a high risk of becoming a disorder. And there's a few exceptions to that. But generally speaking, you know, if you're a very outgoing person and you can't stop and you can't pull back, then that can become a disorder, any human trait. So this also means that you can have a constellation of autistic traits that don't quite reach the level of being dysregulated. And that would be an autism personality. And I believe that this is the only theory to say you can have an autism personality that's not a disability in any way. You could still experience discrimination, people rejecting you because you're a little unusual, but it's not a disability. And of course, autistic people who don't have a disability, somebody with this personality, can become as dysregulated as anybody else. And their autism specific coping mechanisms might also be disabling in certain contexts. All of the strengths, this is a slide I'm going to skip. All of the strengths can be strengths, but they can also be disabling. And if you're interested in learning more, I have my theory that's out there. You're welcome to take a look at it. But I also want to mention that this theory also talks about how autism is, we've got 30% of autistic cases that are due to genetic symptoms, basically. They're not due to symptoms, due to the genetic syndromes, but these are syndromes that are highly associated with autism. None of them have 100% co-occurrence of autism. Hold on one second. Avis, thank you. Most are associated with co-occurring intellectual disabilities, and all of them are associated with physical health conditions. So the BAPCO-DMAP basically says that whether a person has an autism personality or is meeting diagnosis for autism depends on either the intensity of the autistic trait or the presence of co-occurring conditions. So you could just have an autism personality, but now these co-occurring conditions have, they're either present all along or they're flaring at different points in our lives. And now it is impossible to cope as an autistic person with sensory and perceptual differences, with differences in attention or differences in memory, and still manage these co-occurring conditions. And so it'll look like the autism has become this disability when really we should be thinking about these co-occurring conditions. So I know part of my thing is that autism both is and isn't a thing. It's not a singular thing. It's multiple different pathways to autism. And basically each person you meet will be their own unique special pathway of autism, right? We really don't have any two that are the same. So this means that co-occurring conditions should be the first and primary focus for improving autistic self-regulation and mental health. So managing physical health and environmental stressors in conjunction with mental health. All right, so questions for this section. I can take one or two questions and then I want to wrap up.
Thank you so much, TA. This is really thought-provoking, and I love how you've kind of presented this framework.
You have a question from a previous topic. When thinking about a client who might be depressed, I can imagine clients' feelings of capacity of making healthy choices in their diet will be, I can imagine clients' feelings of capacity of making healthy choices in their diet would be correlated with a decrease in depression. And that's a question. For example, more sense of mastery over their behavior might be correlated with decreases in depression symptoms. How do you tease apart the effects of the nutrition itself versus the behavioral activation that is going on there?
Okay, that's a really good question. And I'm actually going to just move straight into the next section because I think I'm going to answer a lot of questions with this next section. This is really that whole teasing apart and it's practitioner focus. So let's get right into it. I already talked about this whole staying in your lane thing earlier and why we matter. So I'm going to skip this. We matter because we help people find their way through problems and solutions and motivation and all of that and through barriers. And I'm going to skip this one. You know about your field. So now if we're going to be working with neurodivergent people, one of the things that we need to do is we need to increase this concept of this mind and body connection, but we have to be careful about it. And I'm going to go back and forth on this. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to welcome you to encourage your clients as they're experiencing anxiety and depression to think about energy. what brings them energy and what takes it away. And I'm going to skip back and forth on this because it's really, I think I can do this in a different way related to the question. So a normal cycle is a person wakes up, and they feel fine, or they're bored, they're finding themselves bored or whatever. And then they kind of move towards an interest or motivation or engagement. Then they get sort of sated on that and they get tired, and then they rest and relax, and then they kind of begin the cycle again. People have that cycle throughout the day, from day to day. That's normal. Stress cycle, especially as a person approaches burnout, like what you're talking about with your clients, for them, they're experiencing anxiety. Then the anxiety builds to a certain point that they move into action, and they engage in the action until they become overwhelmed, overstimulated, overstressed. They get to a certain point, I can't do it anymore. And then they go into exhaustion and depression cycles. And they sit in those cycles and they can't function until the anxiety builds again. And they repeat the cycle. And they're doing this throughout the day, across more days of the week, etc. And as it gets deeper, they can't do that move into action. So when we get into really bad states of depression, they can no longer move into action. The anxiety builds until the point where they're overstimulated, and then they have exhaustion and deepened depression, and they just sit here in this 3-point cycle. Okay, so that's really, really important. When you get clients that are in these places, it's time to start asking them about, and here we go. Sorry, I'm moving everywhere. It's there. What's taking you down? And if you're looking for my assessment, this is my assessment. I start asking them questions about their diet. I start asking them, are you getting water? I mean, I'm water avoidant like you wouldn't believe. I have to really make myself drink water. And I really normalize this for them. And I start to help them understand the relationships between these things. I ask about their movement, their pain and their health issues. I start really going into this deeper and deeper, and they're motivated to answer these questions because they are unhappy and they're really in distress. So when you've got your client in that 6 sessions, this is where you start really trying to tease it out. And it doesn't really matter if they have all of these or not, trying to figure out which one is the anxiety coming from. I start to ask people to identify what is the easiest step that they can take right now, the easiest next step. And let's start from there. And for some people, that's a multivitamin. For some people, it's picking up a phone and calling their friend when they're feeling distressed. It's really going to vary for different people, but we're looking for the first easiest step. And we're going to have to keep adding to this. We're constantly adding to this. And we're finding the places where they feel like they can get some success out of doing it. They can feel an impact out of it. And they're getting something that gets them motivated to do the next easiest step. And so the goal of this is to get people on the upward spiral. So they're on a downward spiral, and we want them to start moving on this upward spiral. And so one of the big things that's part of that spiral is this piece about spoons theory. They only have a certain unit of spoons. They're going to have to negotiate those spoons with other people. And they don't want to do it. They don't want to negotiate. They're mad. And I don't blame them. They're mad. They'll say, why do I have to accommodate an ableist society? And the answer is, you're tired of bad things happening. If you don't take control, other people are in control. Your experience shows you that they don't have the skills to adequately meet your needs. And so the only way out is if you self-advocate, but you have to get on that upward spiral. If you don't have the energy to do it, you can't do it. And so the final piece is going to be conflict management. They're going to have to do conflict management with their doctors, with their schools, with their work. It's going to be this constant place of, how do I manage my health condition, and how do I still function in the world? And so you're back to also, how do you navigate the roller coaster of life, which goes back to what we do. This is what we do, but we're able to do it better because we're no longer gaslighting people that it's their skills, and we're helping them identify their health. All right, so I've reached the end Thank you very much. I think we have a few minutes. I'm going to let you take it over from here.
I love that last slide, TA, and how you're wrapping up the presentation. I think it's really thought-provoking, and I love how you've balanced, right? Like even without kind of the expertise or training in these different things, just knowing these things is powerful, and how we talk about health overall with our clients.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm hoping that was like almost a full course, right?
I
This was
want
the
to
course you
I want
should
to
have
take a course
had,
in it.
right?
Yeah, it is.
Um,
It really
and
is.
that was the goal. It was a lot packed in, but it's enough. I know people aren't going to have all this information memorized, but
Yeah.
the awareness of it means that you now can grab an article that your client that's going to be particularly important to your clients. There are
Yeah.
lots of articles on nutrient deficiencies in the United States. You can get that general information that can be motivating for a client, even if you don't have it for specifically neurodivergent clients. And you can say, here's the general population. It's kind of a bigger deal because you're neurodivergent, and here's that information.
Right.
And so you can
Absolutely.
you can put information together for them and make a case and then say, I know it's hard. I
Right.
know it's hard. We're all struggling with it. You know, let's think about what might be okay for now. What can we do that would be good for now without doing the whole picture?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's so much in this presentation that's relevant, and I appreciate you referencing, right, that for folks who are listening in, we do have time for one more question. If folks have any, please pop them in the Q&A. And you already popped your email in the chat, and so I'm wondering
Perfect.
if people have additional questions, um, if you have any advice for kind of how they can, specific kind of areas for them to focus in on, or how they can get in contact with you if that's appropriate.
Absolutely. I love it. I love it. Contact me. I love it when people are reaching out to me. It makes me really feel like my work is having an impact, that these talks are having an impact. So I definitely encourage people reaching out.
Great. I did not see any questions in the Q&A. Waiting with suspense for our last.
Yay. Yeah. Last minute, do it. TA, you are the first neurodiversity specialist that I hear professionally speak about EDS.
Really?
So thank you. Yes, yes. Like I because I have EDS, I know and I
Yeah.
heard presentations from EDS specialists, but
Yeah.
never from a neurodiversity autism specialist. So this is huge. Thank you so much.
Well, it hopefully it will not be the last,
Mhm.
and I'm encouraging everyone else to learn more and encourage your colleagues to learn more, right?
Mhm.
So each one of you are now founding leaders in this
Absolutely.
field. Yep, absolutely.
Absolutely. And thank you, Irady, for dropping the links in the chat. I think that if you haven't clicked them already, those are some of the various resources that TA referenced in their presentation today. You're also going to see at the very end a link for our feedback survey. It will take you like maybe 5 seconds to complete it, but please complete that if you have a moment. That's really helpful for us as we plan for our subsequent seminars this year. All right. Well, thank you. This was outstanding. We really appreciate you hopping on and talking about this topic. We will be posting the recording on our ABCT website. So for those who had a friend who couldn't make it today, don't worry. You will be able to check this out, and we'll make sure to get that up as soon as we can.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank